Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. This episode is brought to you by the Wellness Paradigm, a holistic health coaching company, shifting the way that women understand and heal their bodies. Through bioenergetic testing, functional lab testing, and functional nutrition, we uncover what traditional approaches often overlook. So you can stop guessing, start healing, and finally feel like yourself again. No more one-size-fits-all approach, just real answers, deep-rooted healing, and the clarity and confidence you deserve to feel incredible. It's time to shift the paradigm of women's health. Now on to the show. Well, hello, Jessica or Jess. I'm excited that you are on today. We're going to have a great conversation. Jessica brings some really interesting insights on home birth and free birth. And she is actually a home birth and free birth guide and emotional embodiment coach. So she really supports women who are planning home births or free births, who want to trust their bodies again, break free from fear, and birth on their own terms. So we're going to have a lovely conversation about this, which I think isn't talked about enough, and also kind of weave in a lot of the postpartum care, how to optimize that postpartum experience as well. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself and kind of how you got into this work.
Yes, so thank you so much for having me, and I'm really excited to delve into this. I am very passionate about the birth and postpartum space, having lived experience as well as experience within the medical and health fields. So kind of what got me into it, obviously, my own birth journey. My planned home birth turned into a preventable C-section, and that kind of lit that fire and that spark in me to kind of delve into all that I do now and to help so women don't experience what I did at the time of my birth and my postpartum journey. But I am a paramedic. That is my background. I started off as a paramedic, worked for 3 years until I got pregnant with my little one, and then delved right into like functional health and functional medicine and holistic health, and really delving into the mind and how the mind operates, and everything just stems from it. And it is kind of like the core of everything as far as health goes, as far as how we navigate through life and navigate through different journeys and seasons that we're in. So yeah, I'm really, really excited and passionate about helping loads of women just really take back and reclaim that power within the birth space.
Yes, so powerful, especially, I think it's probably a little different. You're in Australia, and the
Yes.
US have very, I think, different, but a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences. But you mentioned preventative C-section, and I think I can't remember the exact rate, but the rate of C-sections has skyrocketed almost like 40%, I think, at this point, at least in the United States. And so I would like to dive into, first of all, if somebody's listening, what is maybe a home birth or a free birth? Some people, there's a lot of misconceptions around this. There's a lot of fear around this, a lot of fear mongering around this as well. So let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. So absolutely, you're correct that the rate of C-sections has absolutely skyrocketed all around the world.
Yeah.
Here in Australia, I think it's sitting around 37%. Yeah. And 1 in 4 inductions tend to lead to C-sections. So that's kind of like leading down the cascade of interventions that can occur. But talking about home birth and free birth, basically, a home birth is when you want to birth in your home, in your environment where you feel safe, you feel secure, and your body will know that. Because as you would know from an energetic perspective, our nervous system and our body will know where it's safe to give birth. And usually in sterile environments where you're being coerced and pushed to do things, your body doesn't feel safe, which then leads to further interventions. So a home birth is basically where you birth in your own home. You can either do it with a private midwife. I think the US is a little different with how they might do it, but here in Australia, you can have a private midwife, or you can go through a community midwife program. Then you have free birth, where you can literally take it upon yourself as a sovereign woman to birth on your own, in your home, without any medical assistance or support, and just really feel that power and reclaim that wisdom and that innate knowledge that we have.
The first thing that naturally comes up for probably a lot of women and me is fear around that, right? I mean, we've become so disconnected with the natural birthing process and become so immune to just interventions being normal, right? How would you even open that conversation where the first thing kind of is fear?
Yeah, so fear is a big one because it's pretty much saturated in, I think, in the health industry as a whole, but especially in the birth space. And when women are in that state, they're already vulnerable. So when you start throwing around words like high risk and, we'll just keep it safe, like all these sorts of terms that can really start to mess with women's minds and start to instill that fear. But the first thing that I start off with is, because obviously I deal with a lot of mindset with what I do with women, because it does come down to the mind at the end of the day, is basically pinpointing the fears that they actually have. So whether that's fear around the unknown, if you're a new mum, fear around pain, fear around tearing, all those sorts of things can come up. I really like to start by kind of like, well, is this a fear that you actually have, or is it something that you've inherited? Whether that's from society, whether that's from family members, because we all inherit something, whether it's a belief around money or whatever. We will inherit things surrounding birth as well, particularly from our mums. And that's no fault of anybody's. That's just, how life occurs, and we tend to take on those beliefs from other people. So it's really stemming into where it's coming from. Is it actually something that is your fear and your belief, or is it a projection from somebody else that's been passed down, or from those around you at the time, particularly around home birthing and free birthing, because it's still taboo. It's not really a done thing. So there's a lot of fear when women try and say, I'm going to have a home birth, and then they get met with a wall, and projection of fear then starts to come out from those around them. So it's really important to distill the fact and the difference of whether it's a fear that's come from you, or it's a projection or a belief that's been passed down. So I think that's the main starting point to pinpoint where it's come from.
Yeah, I know. Being in the holistic space, everyone's like, "You're not going to do a home birth, are you?" Like, it wasn't even asking, like, "Are you going to do this?" It's, "You're not going to do this, are you?" You know what I mean? And I was like, actually, for me, I didn't want a home birth. I did want it. I wanted a natural, unmedicated birth, but in a hospital setting, right? And I got the exact opposite, which maybe we talk into, but it was
Yeah.
ended up in a C-section and 30 hours of labor.
Yeah.
But I think it's also, I did come in with education on it, and I just chose what felt good for me, not because of necessarily fear, just like comfort, you know what I mean? But I think the aggression around it was very starking. I was met with so many people that even if that's what I wanted, I probably would have questioned, no, never mind. I don't think I want this. Everybody's saying all this negativity around it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the US, they've gotten, I don't know how it is in Australia, but there's some beautiful centers, and this is what I looked at. There wasn't one close, where you can do like not a home birth, but a natural birth, but it's attached to a hospital as well.
Yes.
Just in case there was an issue, you are close, which I thought is a really nice, like, kind of intermediate. Like, do they have those kind of like in the?
Yeah, so we have the birthing centres here. So they're kind of attached to hospitals, but you still have that, I guess, sense of not being in that too much sterile environment like a hospital setting. Yeah, so they have like water births and things like that in these centres. Yeah, yeah. So they're
Yeah.
definitely an option.
If somebody was kind of wanting to explore that, what sort of, maybe outside of why do you want to do this, where are the fears coming from, where would you kind of emotionally support them to be prepared for, a home birth? And if maybe a doctor's appointment, where is your line of, I guess, scope of practice, where if the doctor says something with discouraging it versus what you maybe know, there's always a fine line about that as well, right?
There is. And I mean, you would know, walking in the health space, you always walk that fine line of kind of, I guess, undermining what the mainstream will say. I tend to come at it and basically say that a lot of it is fear mongering, a lot of it is coercion, I mean, you aren't making an informed choice if you're being pressured or coerced into something. And that's the truth at the end of the day. If you feel pressured into making a decision, you weren't informed in making that decision. And the way I see it is if you feel fear walking out of a doctor's office, they haven't done their job right. At the end of the day, plain and simple, they are there to work for the people. They are there to help in health. You know, they've made those Hippocratic oaths and all these things. But if you're walking out of that office with fear and doubt, they haven't done their job. And so the way I always explain things, I really explain. So I don't just go, you do this. It's no, you do this because it's going to help XYZ. Like there's always an underlying either pathological or physiological reason for why your body's either reacting a certain way, or and particularly in like with pregnant women, a lot of times it'll come around like gestational diabetes, or they've been diagnosed with preeclampsia. But then you want to step back and go, well, why? Why is my body experiencing these things? You know, and as we know, everything gets heightened when we get pregnant because it puts a demand on the body. So if you're already depleted in something or you're already deficient in something, that's only going to increase tenfold when you become pregnant because the demand is there. So when you get diagnosed with certain conditions, that's why we need to go, well, you look at it from a holistic functional point of view and go, okay, well, you were obviously, you know, either had insulin resistance before you were pregnant, or, you know, low iron before you were pregnant, or like all these different things. So there's always a reason. Like your body doesn't do nothing for the sake of it. Like your body is always signaling to you. So when you get diagnosed with these certain conditions that doctors will throw fear at you for and claim that you're high risk for, it's purely fear. It's just them trying to coerce you, because at the end of the day, hospitals don't like women just rocking up in labor. You know, the surgeon can't plan a golf trip if you're just going to rock up on his doorstep that I'm in labor. So they like to schedule you in, which is why they tend to have so many interventions that occur to end up getting you to that point where you're scheduled in for an induction or you're scheduled in for a C-section. That's unfortunately just the way it kind of works. I'm not speaking for all doctors. There are doctors out there that are amazing and tend to look outside of what they were taught. But for the majority, yeah, it's a lot of fear and trying to navigate, obviously not undermining what a doctor has said for legal reasons, but I always explain why something has happened. So they'll either come to me and be like, my doctor said this. Then I explain the reason why that's occurring. And then you kind of take steps back to be like, right, well, this is where it stemmed from. This is how we move forward.
Yeah, I think there's also, I mean, there's a huge legal aspect of this too. You know, they can't legally tell you if you have gestational diabetes that you're not going to be high risk, and then, you know, probably wanting to do, I don't know, C-section, you know, that's not really my scope, but you know, that they have to cover their butt too, right? Which is important. But they're also looking at things from a statistic standpoint as well, which is important, right? You know, the rate of, you know, complications if you do this or that is important. And it tends to strip a little bit away from the person in front of you, being a little more of a statistic rather than looking at the person holistically, right? Which again, isn't necessarily their job. Their job is to get that baby out safe in the way that they know how, which is usually in more of what they are exposed to on a day-to-day basis too. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I think again, we've become very out of tune with this whole natural process too. It's definitely hard because you want to trust the person in front of you because they know what they're talking about to an extent and they have the stats, but that's not always the whole picture.
Right? No, and they tend to go based off textbook, I find a lot of the time. Like I was trained as paramedic, so I was trained in that medical field, and you are just taught you give this pill for this symptom. You know, you're not really taught to look outside and look at the person as a whole. And it's the same for doctors. They just go a little bit deeper into like the physiology of things and how the human body actually functions as a whole. But yeah, they're still taught that textbook stuff. So it can be really hard to, I guess, want to trust your body, but then also there's like so much fear around we have to trust doctors too. And yeah, it can be really hard, but I think at the end of the day, it's mostly about helping the woman come back to her and shutting out the noise and trusting instincts, because our mother's instincts are so freaking hardwired. They're just clouded these days. Like our instincts are just shut down in, as women, we're told to hustle, we're told to do all the things. So we're not listening to our bodies on a daily basis. We're not conscious with our bodies on a daily basis. So when it comes to pregnancy and birth, we're not in tune with that instinct to know what feels right, what's feeling wrong, when we need to ask a question, if we can ask a question, like, yeah, it's crazy. And then obviously you have things from society and then things from movies that'll just add to the psyche of, and, on top of all the fear that you've already been handed. So yeah, it can get really messy, but it just comes back to the woman at the end of the day and helping her to come back to her own and trust those instincts that are already instilled.
How would you guide somebody who is maybe very out of touch, doesn't understand, doesn't think they're intuitive with their body, doesn't think that, we override instinct with logic all the time? And, how would you help them move back into feeling that sovereignty of
Yeah.
their body?
Yeah, so it comes down to emotional embodiment at the end of the day, I feel. So that's kind of like the first step, I feel, is to, I guess, get the woman to start to feel her body again. So, start dancing, but feel what you feel. Like, what do you feel when you dance? What do you feel when you sing? What do you feel when you maybe sensually touch your body, just your arms and stuff? Like, get in tune and in tune with that body. And then you kind of work in from there to be, okay, now that you've kind of started to, I guess, reconnect with your body and your sensuality and what you might be feeling when things, when you're moving your body, then you move into like the NLP side of things and the mindset side of things. So you start to kind of unhinge what is actually happening under the surface. And like I mentioned before, you want to kind of see if these fears that are popping up are actually yours or if they'll pass down. Then we want to go back and kind of, I don't know whether you're all in on the womb, like womb healing and things, and how like there's generational trauma that can be passed down to women. So we can hold up to 7 years, 7 generations of trauma in our wombs. Yeah, so like it can go real deep. Like you can go real deep with this, but that's kind of my starting point, is to get the woman to connect back with her body, and then we go into the mind and see where things might be a little bit muddled, where her voice has been silenced over, is it somebody else's voice saying these things, or do you actually believe that your body is incapable, or whatever the fear might be?
Yeah, I don't work necessarily in energetic womb healing. I have friends that work in specifically like energy womb healing, and it's incredible what they do. I mean, it's an
I know.
absolute gift that, I can look at it from an energetic and a functional level and look at,
Mm,
healing and fertility and, all that stuff. But energy womb healing is a whole nother beast. Very cool.
yeah.
And I think when you also come back to yourself, when you work on this, whatever happens through the birth process too, is your postpartum experience, I do believe, can also be better when you're energetically more aligned with who you are too. How would you prepare somebody both maybe energetically and emotionally for that postpartum period?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of similar, I guess, in just helping them identify who they are as a person. The thing with the whole journey with birth is to make sure that even though you might have a plan, in your head of how you want your birth to go, obviously we all know birth is not 100%. Like things change, things you know, nothing is guaranteed in birth. So the thing is, we don't want to get attached. So that's like the starting point, because I feel like that in postpartum is when you start to have the birth trauma and things come up, is if you got so attached to how you envision something, that's when you'll start to struggle in your postpartum with birth trauma, with grieving a birth. And I myself went through it.
Mm-hmm.
I obviously planned a home birth and it did not go to plan at all. So I grieved that birth. I grieved the birth that I had envisioned, that I had planned for months.
Yeah.
And it was hard. And then all of a sudden it just really kept knocking me down. And I was just like, well, who am I now? Like, I really struggled with that identity shift in postpartum, because it was like, nobody prepared me that I was going to feel different. Like,
Yeah.
like, who am I now that I have this little being? You know, like, I really felt out of touch with who I was as a person, who I was as a woman. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we need to nourish the most, is that our babies are always going to be cared for. It's us that seem to always get lack of support in that postpartum. So it's really making sure that the woman holds on to who she is and doesn't lose track that she is still the same woman. She's just evolved. She's just in a new season. And it's okay to grow and change. And we all do throughout a whole life. But that identity shift can really, you know, be quite hard to overcome, especially as a new mum, first time mum. And preparing them is to basically, yes, you can have a plan for how your birth is going to go, how your postpartum is going to go, how you want to be as a mother. We can all have those visions for ourselves. The thing is to not get so attached, because life can give you lemons, you know, sometimes. So we just want to make sure that we can move and evolve and adapt with life and through these stages, because you are going to be a completely different woman when you get pregnant, and then you'll be a completely different woman once you've birthed that baby, and then you'll be a completely different woman like 4 to 6 weeks later. Mm-hmm. And then you'll be completely different again 2 years later. Like, we're always growing, evolving and changing. So to prepare for that, you need to be open to that and be open to just flowing and surrendering to the process, and not be so rigid in your vision and your dreams. Still hold strong if something obviously doesn't feel right, which is one of the things I do teach, is like still advocating for yourself, so you don't have to go, of course, if not necessary. But if you do, it's okay. It doesn't mean that you failed. It doesn't mean that anything you did went wrong. It's just how life unfolded. So I feel if you can let go and surrender to a process, it's going to make it a lot easier. And when I started doing that, that made my postpartum a lot easier. Like, I think even though I struggled in my postpartum, that was probably the easiest part for me after my birth trauma. I don't like to call it a trauma, but it's such a, you know, nuanced word. But when I started to surrender to the process of postpartum and just being in flow, it was so easy. Like, my baby picked up on it. She was just so intuitive with my emotions and my mood. And if I wasn't so, oh my God, why aren't you doing this? Mm-hmm. It just flows. If you can just chill out and, yeah, like I said, surrender to that process. And it takes time. It's not something that can happen overnight. It is something that you need to be open to, I guess, exploring, especially for those that might feel like control is how they feel safe.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah. It can be really hard. So the way to kind of, I guess, navigate, it's going to be a different journey for everybody, because I can't speak to everybody, because like I just mentioned, some people might need that control to feel safe, but that's going to hinder the process for them. So working with somebody like that, that's when you start tapping into the NLP side and go, well, why do you need control? Where did that stem from? You know, the little girl in you that needed control to feel safe.
Yep.
So it's kind of like you go into that whole NLP side of things, that whole shadow work side of things, and really start to unravel it for them, because postpartum is the most important part, I feel. Like, we can all birth babies. We know this. Like, it's natural, it's nature. We can all birth babies. What society has instilled in us women for what postpartum should look like is the hard part. And then you're left to it. Everybody's like, you've had the baby now, like, off you go. And it's like, well, no. We're supposed to have support. We're supposed to have that village. And we don't have it at all. And I feel like that is where we are severely lacking as society, is we're just letting women create this mentality that we have to be doing it all. We have to breastfeed, then we have to get back to work, and we have to start providing, and we have to do all the things, as well as keep the house clean and food on the table. And it gets really overwhelming. And that's why you end up with anxiety and postnatal depression and all the things, because we're just putting so much pressure on women to bounce back.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah.
Well, it's funny you mentioned shadow work and things like that, because I think oftentimes we don't want to look at our past thinking when we're having a baby. That's not important. We need to just look at the future. And it's like, but who you are when you get pregnant on a nervous system perspective, and that's going to carry postpartum, is going to significantly change how you feel postpartum. Like, obviously there are curveballs that life can throw at you. But one of the biggest things when I work with clients with fertility, it's like, yes, we can do the nutrient balancing that can help tremendously with postpartum anxiety and, things like that. But, and just general health postpartum, but you got to work on that nervous system regulation, because also your kids, like you mentioned, they pick up on your energy. And people have told, like my husband and I all the time, they're like, he's a great kid. And it's because you guys are so regulated and, very, very regulated, and that I do not take that for granted. But think about that, right? It's, I just have an ornery kid, and you want to, like, it's hard because we have to, like, you don't want to feel bad about yourself, right? And that's such a mom guilt thing. It's like, I'm messing my child up. It's like, no. Let's not come at it from that perspective. It's just, how can we feel more regulated? It's in a very dysregulating time, right? It's not like everything's going to be sunshine and butterflies, but how can we at least take a moment to bring ourselves back to calm amongst a child crying for 3.5 hours, but it's in those moments where you're like, thank God I did some of that work, because I'm freaking the F out. I had many of those moments because my child, I thought, was colic. So like, but pretty much. So but I think I'm also going to tap on something very personal with my experience that might relate. I did not have the birth plan I wanted. Like, I did want it in a hospital. I did have fear. I said I didn't early. I don't know why, around this, and I wanted a natural unmedicated birth, but, with just in case, I had every intervention freaking possible. I had everything, an emergency C-section. All right.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of peace with that postpartum. And the reason I did is because I didn't attach, as you said, to that this is the only way. But it's hard because then I didn't want to, like, I'm manifesting this other thing. You know what I mean? But I felt I advocated for myself appropriately. I did a lot of the work. Like, I did so much work postpartum on the emotional side, on the physical side. I was doing pelvic floor PT to open, that up. I was also doing like NLP kind of birth, hypnosis kind of work. I was doing like all of the things, like. And so I felt a little bit of grieving with almost the time where I was like, well, shoot, if I knew this was going to happen, I would have just saved myself so much of that. You know what I mean? But I felt good, and I felt I had a better postpartum experience because I knew when I went in there, I advocated for myself the way I wanted to. The people were respectful, which unfortunately this isn't, this is just something you can't always control, but the people respected my wishes. But they did also say when things did get a little bit harsh, my baby had 4 nuchal cords wrapped around his neck. So he wasn't dropping, like there was. After 30 hours, I had tachysystole and I had polyhydramnios. Like I did unmedicated for like 18 hours, but I gave up when you had 4 minutes of contractions and 1 minute off for 2-3 days straight. It was, but but I felt confident when I made the decision that it wasn't a strictly emotional driven decision, and a little bit of pressure, because I did feel the pressure. I did feel, the pain. I felt that, but then I realized I advocated for myself. And then when I felt I was comfortable making that decision, not anybody else for me, then I made that next decision for myself. And it was medical intervention, you know what I mean? And I felt okay with that, you know what I mean? But I think that's really important, is whether the home birth goes beautifully, which is what ultimately you want, or,
Mm.
and if it doesn't, knowing you did your best and you had that, I don't know the right word, but that confidence in yourself, I think that makes that postpartum experience a lot easier. Yeah.
100%. And it's good that you touched on that because it's very important. Obviously, I specialize in the home birth and free birth, but if things do go a bit awry and you end up in hospital, or you planned a hospital like you did but wanted unmedicated, the fact that you could still have that autonomy and you were still decision led for your birth journey, you weren't coerced, you weren't pressured, that is the most important thing. That is what is holding you onto your sovereignty in birth. You haven't handed anything over to anybody else. The choices were still yours to make. And even though if they had presented to you that, okay, maybe things have gone a little bit awry now, we need to progress into a C-section, that's okay because you've done everything up until then. There does sometimes become a point where medical intervention is necessary.
Yeah.
I'm not so taboo that I'm like, fuck the Western medicine, completely. Like there is a time and place for it, absolutely. I just feel that it's so over medicalized, especially in the birth space now, and it doesn't need to be. It does not need to be. And they throw around high risk like like no tomorrow. And you're not actually high risk. It's just a blanket term that they use for anything that you've either been diagnosed with in pregnancy. And I think helping women understand that so they can make those informed choices for themselves with their birth journey is going to be absolutely paramount for the outcome for them and how they feel in that postpartum.
I think too, when you throw a diagnosis, while very much maybe still true, it shifts the way that women think about their pregnancy too, right? I'm high
Yeah.
risk. Oh, I can't do anything. I have to sit in this little chair. I can't, my like it changes. You know what I mean? And it's
Like
like,
the ultimate fear that they can throw at a woman is you are high risk. Automatically, they're going to go, is my baby safe?
is my baby safe?
Is
Am
my
I
baby going to
broken?
be safe?
What did I do
Yes.
wrong?
Yes.
And that
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
scary. you
It
know?
is. It is. But I mean, you would understand this. Like going back in time, humans didn't have the deficiencies they do today. And like I mentioned earlier, if you have deficiencies, which you would know looking at lab work, I know from looking at lab work in the past, is that so many people are deficient in things. And when you get pregnant, you're going to further deplete those stores because it puts higher demand on the body. So it doesn't mean anything's broken. It just means you weren't looking and listening to your body because it's always telling us something, always. No matter how minute, it's always speaking to us. And we weren't listening. So then when you hit that pregnancy stage, that's when things start to go a little bit downhill. But that doesn't mean that you're broken. It just means we've lost touch with our intuition, with our instincts, and with listening to our body and being conscious with our body.
Yeah, postpartum depletion, mineral depletion, it is the single most thing. That nervous system
Yeah.
work, in a fertility client or clients who want to get pregnant, like do this work now. Don't do it when you get pregnant and then expect, because then it becomes harder. And then that postpartum period,
Yeah.
you're depleted, and it's not like crazy, like you have to do anything crazy. It's just, eating balanced food, having a little bit more minerals and,
Mm.
make sure
It's just replenishing, basically, replenishing what the body lost in birth and childbirth. But yeah, your mindset is everything. It will literally be determine how you go through life and how you choose to show up as a mum, how you choose, your choices that you make throughout motherhood. You're always constantly doing the work. And in my postpartum, I suffered postpartum rage. And that was like my turning point in my brain to go, well, something's not right here. Like, everybody said I should be in bliss, in this baby bubble, and I wasn't feeling it. I felt so much shame and embarrassment that I was not in love with my child in postpartum, and it just made me spiral more. And so that's when my first instinct was to be like, okay, I need help. I need to figure out what is wrong with me and what is going on in my head that's making me, act out like this in postpartum. So that was kind of my turning point to be like, right, now I'm going to delve into trauma work. So that's when I first sought out a trauma coach, and she delved into NLP with me. So that's when I first got a taste of that. And it was like, and then it just sent me down this whole rabbit hole. I was like, wow, the mind is just incredible. We really do harbor so much shit that isn't ours. And yeah, in that postpartum, you should be in a baby bubble. You should be in bliss, but it's also okay if you're not. Like, it's okay, you're not broken, but it's just a sign to know that you might need to look a little bit deeper and do a little bit of work. It's, it
Yeah.
means nothing about you. It's just, how society has expected us to be, things that have been passed down from parents for nobody's fault, but it's just how life has kind of gone. And yeah, we just need to, I guess, come back to that and just do the work. Yeah, it's very important.
So true. I think kind of ending it on a high with, have you witnessed specific transformations in your clients, whether during birth or postpartum, that kind of like stand out to you?
I have actually. There's been quite a few that when you do, and I haven't even had to dig deep, but it's just kind of, I guess, bringing to light a bit more self-awareness for women and for them to start questioning a certain thought pattern that might put them into a spiral or, those sorts of things. And there's been a few women that you start digging and asking certain questions, and they start asking those questions themselves and become real self-aware. And it's really cool to watch, because then they can start navigating it for themselves and be like, oh, why did that trigger me right now? Why is something so minuscule has triggered a response that was reactive, like, and it wasn't even that big a deal. And I think the one thing that I like to say is, if it's hysterical, it's historical. So it's like the biggest saying in NLP world is, if you have a hysterical response to something, it's historical. It's something that has happened before. And I can relate to that. Like, I've had a over the top response to something that was so minor, and you're like, what was that?
I like
So
that.
yeah, it's really, really cool to watch them have those light bulb moments and be like, wow, okay, I need to rein that in and figure out where that come from. And it's really beautiful to teach them how to do that ongoing, because then they can just self-reflect and become aware of certain patterns that they might be playing out, and how they react to certain situations, and just begin, continue to do the work beyond me. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful to just help them navigate that, because we are in a fickle world where everything can get really overwhelming. We can start to overanalyze everything. And I feel like within the holistic space, that's become quite big, is that we all start to overanalyze and overthink everything, because, oh, what if that's, a cause? What if that's doing that? Like, and then you start to really nitpick, and it's like, nah, because then that's creating a whole different issue in itself. So yeah, it's beautiful to help them kind of navigate it, and so they can carry it on and continue to do that work on their own merit.
Totally. If there's something, would there be something like one message you wish every woman knew about, their body or birth, that you want to kind of close out with?
Oh, it'll be so simple, but your body knows what to do. It literally does. It was designed for it. And if you can look into Mother Nature and watch how other mammals and other animals are doing it, and they don't think about it. They just do it. It's an instinctual thing that is literally pre-programmed in us to do. So we just need to shut out all the outside noise.
Yeah, true. Well, thank you so much. I hope this was really insightful for anybody that, is wanting to explore this path, maybe just wants a little bit more info, wants to understand it, different types of birthing processes, and figure out what feels at best and whole for you. Jess, tell us where people can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Sovereign Birth Collective, and I'm always there. I'm always on my DMs. My DMs are always open to everybody. I love just providing value and just really love to uplift women in this space because it's so sacred and it's beautiful.
It really is. I will link that down below. And, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And I hope
Thank you.
those of you listening gained a lot of value. If you did, would love to hear your thoughts. Share it with somebody that might be in the same position as you. And we'll see you guys on the next show.
Yeah, thank you.
Jess.